from father.
Madam, why don't you dress your hair more fashionably?
But mother, shaking her head, pursed her thick lips and walked away without saying a word. Soon afterward, Aunt Chang brought a regular hairdresser, a Mrs. Chang, to mother. She was older than Mrs. Liu and a huge flat yellowish face with two protruding shiny gold teeth. At a glance, one could tell she was the kind of woman who likes to gossip. She would ramble on about people from old Mr. Chow's elder daughter-in-law down to General Lee's third concubine, all while dressing mother's hair. Mother sat bolted on her chair, not uttering a single word, but I listened with great relish. Sometimes Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Cheng came together. Mother and the concubine would sit back to back in front of the breezeway and have their hair dressed. One could hear Auntie and Mrs. Liu talking and laughing on our side. Mother just sat resting with her eyes closed. Mrs. Cheng brushed and combed with less and less vigor, and soon quit altogether.
This antique of a country here. She still wants her hair to be combed and dressed.
I was so angry that I cried, but didn't dare tell mother. From then on, I stood on a low stool and brushed mother's hair into the simplest abalone fish. I would stand on tiptoe and watch mother in the mirror. Her face was already not as plump and radiant as when we lived in the country, and she hurried about in the kitchen. Her eyes fixed on the mirror, she gazed at herself absent-mindedly, never again squinting and smiling. I gathered mother's hair a lock at a time and brushed, but I already knew that one little yellow willow comb couldn't brush away mother's heart sickness, because from the other side of the breezeway came floating across the occasional tinkling sound of father's and auntie's laughter. After I grew up, I left home to pursue my studies. I was studying in Shanghai. Mother wrote to say she had rheumatism and couldn't lift her arms. I clutched her letter in my hands, and I sat bathed in desolated moonlight beside the dormitory window. I cried in loneliness. The late autumn night breeze blew over me and I felt cold. I draped the soft sweater that mother had knit for me over my shoulders, and warmth crept over me from head to toe. But mother was old now. I couldn't always be at her side. She has cut off her thinning hair, but how could she trim away a heart full of sorrows? Soon afterward, Auntie came to Shanghai on business and brought me a picture of mother. I hadn't seen her for 3 years. Her hair had already turned silvery white. Saddened, I stared dumbly at the picture, yet had no way of pouring out my feelings to Auntie, who stood before me. Almost as if sympathizing with my thoughts of mother, she rambled on and on about mother's present condition. so she was not as strong as before. I bowed my head and listened in silence, thinking that it was she who had made my mother unhappy all of her life. But I didn't hate her anymore, not even a little bit, because since father's death, mother and auntie had unpredictably become friends in their mutual suffering. After coming to Taiwan, auntie became my only relative, and we lived together for many years in the breezeway of our Japanese-style house. I watched her sit by the window brushing her hair.
My hands are really stiff. I'm truly old now.
Old, she too was old. Her black hair, like a silken cloud in those days, had now gradually thinned out. I remembered the days of their rivalry in Hangzhou, when she and mother sat back to back in the corridor, having their hair coiffure, not exchanging a word. In a flash, all that was past in the human world, what then is love and hate? Old decrepit auntie had finally started on a vague journey in an unknown direction. Her life at this time was lonelier than anyone else's.
Let me brush it into a new style, alright?
What do I want fancy styles for? It's for young people.
Can I stay forever young? What she had said is already more than 10 years past. I'm far from being young anymore, already callous and wooden toward love, hate, greed, and foolishness in this world. The days with mother slip farther and farther behind me. Auntie's ashes, too, are deposited in a lonely temple somewhere. What, after all, is eternal in this world, and what is worth being serious about?